Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 3, I think, of our Reader's Workshop lesson. And I hope that you have had a lot of fun reading Tiny Tea and the Impossible Hug. But today, our reading skill that we want to challenge you with is how do we identify the central message of a story? Now, we've kind of done central message in nonfiction text, but we don't call it central message. We call it the main idea. And so now, we don't have we don't say main idea in our stories because there's a lot of different ideas that are happening in a story. It's actually what is the message that the author wants you to go away with after you read the book. What does the author want you to kind of feel or learn, or really think to convey what's happening or how it changed you? How did the characters change, and how did that change your perspective of either the characters or even in real life? So we kind of want to break down this skill for you. So one way, and there's so many different ways, remember, so many different strategies for how we can come up with the central message. But one strategy that I like to use is I like to think about, well, what happened in the beginning of the story with the character, and what happened at the end of the story with the character, and what changed? What happened to the character, because we can learn a lot from how our characters change to really know, well, what's the author trying to teach me in this part of the story? So I wanted to model it with you, with our teachers today, using the story we read last week about No More Noisy Nights. So if you remember, we were reading about Jackson and all the different creatures. And so I went and I thought about, okay, in the beginning of the story, we remember Jackson couldn't sleep because creatures were making noises. That's basically his big problem. He was trying to figure out the whole time in the story. And at the end, Jackson was able to fall asleep without the noises. So we have to ask ourselves, what changed from the beginning to the end that our author wants us to remember so that we could write it down right here where the central message is? So I'm going to give our teachers some time, and you can try to challenge yourself to think about this too, but I really want you to listen and hear how the teachers are explaining their thinking, because they might give you some clues as to what you might want to be on the lookout for when you try it on your own in the next story. So teachers, will give you some time. I'll reread it. In the beginning, Jackson couldn't sleep because creatures were making noises. But at the end, Jackson was able to fall asleep without the noises. So what changed, and what can we learn from Jackson in this story? Miss Yakimowicz?
So what I remember in that story is that Jackson was really determined to help his friends, or his new neighbors, and so he came up with things that those friends can do while he was sleeping and while they were awake. Um, so he really thought about it and reflected, what can I do to help my friends?
Awesome. And I love that. I think that's very true. That's one of the ways that he solved that problem. He was like, well, the monsters keep saying that he's bored, that they're bored, but Jackson was the one who went and helped them figure it out. Miss Rosales, did you want to add on to that?
So I wanted to add that he was very well when he was thinking about it, because he went ahead and talked to each creature. So that was one thing. He told them what was his concern. Like his concern was, or his worry was, the activity that they were experiencing or they were doing was interfering with him and his sleeping. So he vocalized what was the problem to the creatures themselves. And then unfortunately, you would want the creature to solve their own problem, but Jackson is such a good friend, as Ms. Yakimowicz mentioned. He ended up finding a possible solution, which the monsters they took it and embraced it and used it, which ended up benefiting not only Jackson, but the creatures themselves. So just wanted to vocalize that.
I love that. And because I heard the same thing from you guys, I'm going to actually reword the sentence and say Jackson problem solved for his friends. Because that's basically what changed from the beginning to the end. And we know that in central message, we don't want to just say, oh, Jackson problem solved for his friends. Usually in a central message, we word it in a way where it's a big lesson that we can all learn. So we can reword it by saying, we can problem solve
To help others.
to help others. Perfect. Exactly. So do you see how we wrote that? So at the first, we used a specific text evidence, Jackson problem solved for his friends. And then we want to change that language to apply it for our real lives. So we can say, now we can problem solve to help others. So that's kind of like a two-step thing. Yes, Ms. Rosales, did you have a thought?
Oh, I was just like, oh, I'm mind blown because, yeah, our authors who created these stories for us, they do want us to walk away with this knowledge. So now that I know that I picked up this book, I read through it, I know that I too have the power in me to help others around me if they ever get stuck on something.
Exactly. And that's why I love reading, because we can learn from so much from our characters and apply it to our own lives and help others while we do it. And I also wanted to mention, Ms. Rosales made another point where she was giving us two central messages, and that can happen in a story. There can be more than one message that an author is trying to get us to understand. So if you have a very different thought, doesn't mean you're wrong, as long as you can prove to us where you got that evidence from, because I can see where Ms. Rosales and Ms. Yakimowicz came up with Jackson problem solved for his friends, because he went in, got a puzzle, gave Pixie a piano sheet music. So he actually did problem solve for his friends. And then we just reword it to something that we can apply for our real lives. So awesome job, teachers. We did really well with No More Noisy Nights. Let's see if we can do the same thing for the next story. And that's Tiny T and the Impossible Hug. So this time I'm going to invite the teachers to help me come up with, well, what happened in the beginning of the story of Tiny T and the Impossible Hug? And I'm going to give you at home some time to think about what happened in the beginning. And you can always pause the video. And when you're ready, teachers, you can give me a thumbs up. Ms. Rosales, would you like to share?
So Tiny T, is it Tiny T? Saw his friend Pointy, really sad.
Awesome. Saw that his friend Pointy. So revocalizing what Ms. Rosales just said, Tiny T saw that his friend Pointy was really sad. And I would agree, that's what happened in the very beginning. And we get to the whole story where he's just trying to see what's going to happen to Pointy, right? So at the very end, where does that leave us? What happened at the very end of the story? Ms. Yakimowicz?
At the end, Pointy or Tiny T made Pointy feel better.
Awesome. That was beautifully put. So if we look at our beginning and our end, let's ask ourselves, what changed? How did our character change from the beginning and the end? And what does that tell us about what we can apply in our real lives? This might be a little tricky. And so boys and girls, I'm going to challenge you to think. There can be so many different ideas about why the character Tiny changed from the beginning into the end. And I want you to write exactly how we did it in the first example. We wrote exactly in the story what happened, and then we reworded it in the second sentence using a pronoun we, because this can be applied for everyone. Not only can Jackson problem solve for his friends, we as people and human beings can do the same for our friends as well. And I want you to do the same thing for Tiny over here. So we saw that Tiny T saw that his friend Pointy was really sad, but at the end, Tiny T made Pointy feel better. So what happened in the story that helped Pointy feel better, and what does that teach us from the story? So we're so excited to see your own thinking, and we know this is kind of hard and new, so it's okay if it's a little hard. We just want to challenge you just a little bit to kind of take a risk, and we can give you feedback to really improve on how do we identify the central message next time. So we're excited to see what you're going to come up with. Thank you for joining us today. Bye.
Don't forget to subscribe.